Good morning and welcome to The Usual Suspects. Gary Jordan is away. I'm Steve Van Coor. This week was some pretty important political news. We learned that our sitting senator, U.S. Senator Bill Nelson, had an announcement that he has prostate cancer. First things first, Senator Nelson, we wish you a healthy and speedy recovery. But also part of his announcement, he said this will not affect his plans for re-election. Now, in a normal cycle, which we haven't been in for some time, this would be the lead story, that our sitting senator has announced basically, A, that he's sick, B, that he's going to run for re-election. Most of you watching this show probably didn't even hear that story. The reason is we had two giant stories this week, and I want to put that in perspective. We're in an off year. This is not the election year, and it's summer, normally a time when news is very, very slow. Story number one, Mr. Motormouth himself, Alan Grayson, U.S. Congressman, is running for the U.S. Senate, shaking things up there. But a bigger story yet was the Florida Supreme Court basically took one of those daisy cutter bombs to the congressional maps, demanding that 8 of them be redrawn. And in redrawing 8 of those districts, it will at least impact 20, 22, 24 seats, including the one here in North Florida. Sean Pittman?
We didn't know we were going to get introduced here today.
There's just so much going on.
Great job summing that up, because I didn't know what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's right. Mary Ellen, you've been following the story closely. Mary Ellen Klaus with the Miami Herald. And we've asked an election attorney to come with us because this is going to be tough to break down. Glenn Burhans, Glenn with Stearns, Weaver, Miller. You guys are out of Miami, opened up an office here.
That's correct. We're a statewide firm. I joined about 1.5 years ago to expand the Tallahassee office, and since that time we've been in growth mode. Very exciting time for us.
And you've been doing election law for quite some time.
About 14 years.
Yeah, so you got a chance to look at this 177-page opinion?
That's right. Well, including Judge Lewis's trial court decision, it's 170-odd pages.
Okay, wow.
It's pretty dense.
So this is an exciting time for you right now. This is you don't even need Wheaties in the morning right now.
I stay up late nights reading decisions like this. Yes.
Well, we're gonna take a moment. We're gonna break down that decision because it more than just the legal aspects of it. This has huge political aspects, especially in the North Florida district. Stay with us. We'll be right back to break that down. It was almost like the Florida Supreme Court said, hey, U.S. Supreme Court, you're not the only ones who can have some fun. We're going to have some fun, too. And they took our congressional maps, and they're throwing them, like the dice in the Yahtzee cup, shaking them up and throwing it back on the table. Well, Glenn, why don't we start with you? What's your 30,000-foot legal view of this case? What does it mean?
Well, Steve, I think you said it right in the introduction where the court tossed a cookie cutter bomb into our election system, because this is really going to, I think it potentially blows up the map. It's not, like you said, just those 8 districts. It's all the surrounding areas as well are going to have to be looked at. And it's going to have an impact and change kind of the balance of seats to some degree in our congressional delegation. And looking ahead to the state legislative fight that's on the horizon, it's going to have impact there in shaping how that battle plays out.
Well, and the Supreme Court's not going to redraw those districts. Make that point. They're not drawing
these districts. Right, they said they're not doing it. They said they had confidence in the legislature to actually do that.
They said they had confidence, but then they showed their level of confidence by putting into an opinion specific directives, which was completely unprecedented. This is, for example, the most significant change is the Corinne Brown district, which goes from Jacksonville to Orlando, and is designed basically to slice out black voters, and as a result makes it, the surrounding districts more white, which helps Republicans. So what they ended up doing is commanding that they do an east-west district. That kind of, and then there's other level of specificity through several districts, which is just, now, legislature we don't trust.
At once we defer to you, and we assume you weren't that bad, but yet we're going to tell you exactly what to do.
Well, let's keep in mind, because in this conversation, it'll sound a lot like we're talking about Republicans, bad Republicans, for not drawing these districts correctly. But in the case of what you're talking about, the Democrats actually did that in the 1990s.
It was a judge, a three-judge panel that actually drew
the African Americans out
right.
of the regular Democratic districts.
Right, because that was the
That was some
thinking.
heavy influence by the legislature, though. Because
one big difference,
remember,
we didn't have fair districts.
We didn't have fair districts. But you remember you had black Democrats way back before the 1990s reapportionment saying, we want our own safe districts.
That's right.
Democrats were in control, and they actually got that, which weakened all of the other Democratic districts, making it the Republican and Democratic areas really tight. Yeah. And then you got rid of term limitations came, and it changed the landscape.
But it was the allegiance between the black Democrats and the Republicans to draw those districts based on the Voting Rights Act. So that was what it was.
But the result led to the Republicans taking the state.
Yes.
And at some point in this show, we have to talk about what the result of this may be, because the impact is much larger than the 8 seats that we're talking about.
How many seats do you see being affected, Glenn?
Steve, it could be upwards of 20 to 25 when all is said and done, because remember, geographically, they all touch upon a number of other districts. They're not in isolation, so you can't just cherry pick a handful without looking at what's surrounding and touching the districts. But there may be a bigger fight coming, because while you're right, the Supreme Court was very clear to say, look, we're not going to draw the map. They did give very specific direction to the legislature on how to do it. What if the legislature doesn't do that?
Exactly.
Now,
because the court said, we don't have the authority, we might have the authority.
Maybe.
But look at what they did. They also kept jurisdiction of the case. Now, how unusual is that?
That's very unusual.
Yeah.
So they've told the legislature, do it this way, do it in 100 days. We're keeping jurisdiction, and while we're not going to draw the map, they did float a trial balloon discussing some cases where court stepped in after the legislature couldn't get their act together and draw the maps to be compliant with law. So I think they're setting up the possibility that legislature, if you don't listen to us, we may come in and do your job for you. And that sets off a much bigger fight.
And if you read the language, it's pretty evident that the staff and the justices have a working knowledge of how to do shape files. They're using the terms in their decision of how to actually do the logistics
I thought
of
the
building
same thing. I thought, this is no ivory tower decision. This is no, we're up here, we're looking at the law. This is very technical, very specific, very instructive. It was, I mean, do you agree with that?
No, I agree. And when you really look at it, they drew a roadmap for the map, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and the question is what happens when, probably, you were around the legislature all the time, but when the legislature doesn't follow that roadmap the way that the Supreme Court is intending for them to do. You know, yes, they kept jurisdiction, but what really happens after that?
And we saw that in the last round where I think it was the Senate seat where the judge sent it down with specificity, and the legislature took it to that moment and not one step further. And that's going to be the question. How far do they take it? How passive aggressive is the legislature? But either way, they're coming back. I mean, they're coming back really quickly.
And then the other thing is that, so then the trial court gets after the map is completed, the trial court has to say yes or no, this follows the directive of the Supreme Court, and the trial court's already kind of been chastised by the Supreme Court.
Was it Judge Reynolds or Judge Lewis?
No, this is Judge Lewis, although who knows who's going to get it next. And then if it's possible that it could go back to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court could reject what the trial court says again. So, you know.
Is that your read too, Glenn?
I think that's exactly right.
Okay. So back to you, though, right? I mean, because this is my encyclopedia of everything, right? So as you look at this and you think about particularly the Gwen Graham situation, the Corrine Brown situation, I mean, are we looking at, is there any precedent in the past that we've seen like this? I mean,
no, this is total new territory, right? And what does this mean for North Florida and Gwen Graham's district? What does she do if her district is taken away? That's the big question.
Well,
right?
and that is likely to be a huge impact.
Well, let's do a cliffhanger here.
Gotcha.
When we come back, we're going to talk about your sitting congresswoman and what's going to happen to her career. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Lively discussion about what the Florida Supreme Court does. That doesn't happen every day, does it? Glenn, what did the court prescribe for the North Florida District?
Okay, for that district, the court said running Congresswoman Brown's district north to south just doesn't work. You've got this very oddly shaped district that runs along a highway and is trying to just scoop in as many black voters as possible. And for a variety of reasons, that doesn't work. And they want it. I mean, they've pretty clearly said it really needs to kind of push from east to west, and that's going to necessarily involve coming out as far as Leon County in all likelihood, and siphoning off black voters into that district.
The current 2nd Congressional District runs east-west, starting in Panama City, going out, to Madison County-ish on the east. And it's a legitimate swing district.
It's a swing district, legitimate.
This would take Corinne's Brown district, which was anchored in Jacksonville. Probably come over.
But it sounds like, according to what you're saying, that it's just going to not do that north and south, but do it east and west, picking off black voters east and west instead of north and south.
Yeah.
I mean, is that
a fair point?
So,
you said something that's right. It looked optically a little better.
That's right, and that's what it comes down to. And part of the problem, one problem that the Supreme Court had with the trial court decision was it focused a little too much on some of the optics of how districts looked, and would only go after kind of the obviously bad-looking ones. It's somewhat ironic now they're directing the legislature to kind of do the same thing and focus on the optics of this one district, make it look a little better. Now, there are other technical requirements in terms of getting the right mix of voting age population and things like that, but at the end of the day, it sounds to me more like a concern of trying to make it look more compact, more regular shape, more contiguous in terms of the geographic areas included, and probably trying to respect more the natural political boundaries that are within the area as well.
It seems to me that also what they're going to do is keep the urban areas together.
Yes.
And so when you get into that Orlando area, those people are going to see a new congressman. There's no doubt about it.
And Webster's district, I don't see how it survives.
And yeah, Webster's district will also be dismantled. I think, though, that what there is some speculation is that this could be a new opportunity for a black in Central Florida, not necessarily a majority district like Corinne Brown's, but one heavily influenced. And if they can get if someone there could run with the Hispanic vote as well, that's a new opportunity, I think.
And if that happens, in my opinion, that takes away a district from Gwen Graham, because Corinne Brown would like, in a Democratic primary, in a closed Democratic primary where only Democrats vote, it's going to be a strong majority of black voters. And I think if you have a Corinne Brown, a sitting congresswoman, against the new Gwen Graham, I think it makes Gwen Graham have to either choose to run in the very Republican district that begins here and goes west to Panama City and beyond, or run for something different.
Yeah, but when you talk about that, and we've all been reading about all the folks saying jumping in races and thinking about running, but think about if it actually goes east-west, it picks up a bunch of African Americans, it takes Gaston County, add to the equation somebody like an Al Lawson, who decides to go up against a Corinne Brown, which splits that vote completely and leaves an opportunity for somebody else.
So in that scenario, a winner-take-all, closed Democratic primary, Al Lawson would win Leon County, walking away, the black vote in Leon County, and Gadsden, where he's from. Corinne Brown wins the Jacksonville vote. That provides Gwen Graham an opportunity to split the middle and win the rest of that vote.
Well, it's just, we just use this as an example,
that explains
right?
why Gwen was having lunch with Al yesterday. Just kidding, I don't know if she was. Al, you should run for that seat.
But let's talk about Gwen for a second. I mean, just specifically about her. What an incredible race she won.
Absolutely.
An incredible race she ran, and what a great job she's doing.
Absolutely.
And now, in the midst of all of that, now she's got to think about all of this.
Right.
I mean, I think
I'm going to go out on a limb and say she hasn't stopped thinking about it. I'll tell you two indications. One, by all accounts, she's more of a centrist than people had thought she would be. She should have been endorsing Patrick Murphy for the U.S. Senate. She didn't, I think, anticipating this. Secondly, put this in your bonnet. Since she's been elected, she's raised over $5,000 every single day she's been in office. She just crested $1 million raised.
Right.
So I think she's been thinking about this. And I think she's prepared because she enjoys this leadership role, and
she's
doing
very good
a great
at
job. So, but we use that as an example of just the kind of things that's going to be going on throughout the state. And to your point, which you made so eloquently earlier, you cannot take these 8 seats and think it doesn't have an impact statewide. So we're looking at a whole, we may see more than one special session on this. What about the Senate? What about the state Senate?
Well, that's to me fascinating.
That's to come, right?
Yeah. I mean, right now they've got a challenge. They're already
going
challenged.
to trial in September, and so those lawyers have to be thinking, and the trial judge is going to be thinking long and hard about what just came out of the Supreme Court in terms of the standards they're expecting to see and expecting to be applied. Nobody wants to go through that big, complex, expensive trial to have it undone because they didn't follow what was pretty clear guidance from the Supreme Court. That's ultimately going to be judging any appeal of that case.
And the other thing that is, if you look at the Senate districts and against the congressional districts, you will see that a lot of them are nested within them, right?
Absolutely.
So
currently,
the idea that we've got the foundation of the Senate map is the congressional map, and the congressional map's just been blown up. What does that mean? The question I have for the elected officials is, why are you even defending the Senate map, given this opinion? Shouldn't you just go in and redo it?
So you're thinking
why should we be spending
here,
taxpayer money defending this?
That would be bold. If the Florida legislature comes back into special session and says, let's just get to the bottom line.
They won't.
And redraw. I agree with you.
It's too rational.
We get to dream a little bit, right?
Stranger things have happened.
But
I think
it's a legitimate question. They've spent millions defending this congressional. I think it's in the several $1 million at this point. That's what they're going to expend on defending the Senate map.
That's right.
It's money. It's taxpayer money. It's my money.
This is a house of cards and a bunch of dominoes all falling together at the same time, because not only does it shake up the congressional races in a big, big way, we're going to go from about 3 competitive Senate House seats right now, U.S. House seats in Florida, to probably 6 or 7, with Florida already being ground zero for the presidential race, one of the most important U.S. Senate races in the nation, right, that could determine the tip of balance of the U.S. Senate. Now, with every major media market, will have a heavily competitive congressional seat in it. And then underneath that, you've got all these senators going to be jumping back and forth. I mean, it is going to turn this game into absolute chaos, because then when you change the Senate, who's nested under the Senate? The House seats. And they're going to start running and jockeying for position. It's going to be pure chaos. Any other thoughts on this before we cut a break?
That just made, that's exhilarating, actually.
And we were going to talk about Alan Grayson, how much fun it's going to be to have Alan Grayson.
Well, I tell you, I am excited about this East-West thing. I surely hope it doesn't affect Gwen Graham in that way, but I will tell you this. I think that, the African-American leaders and public figures in these areas almost run out of things to do in this area, because there's not been a congressional seat for them to ascend to. And you think of, there's so many great ones that are out there doing incredible work that have to end at a certain point because there's nowhere else for them to go. So, this is exciting, and I think Jacksonville, I think it's time for a change.
That's right. Well, good point. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a second. I don't want to let that last comment go. Sean, you said something about the sitting senator, Congresswoman from...
No, you thought I said something about it. I'm still talking about the Supreme Court and all the lines this is an exciting time.
I will say it. I think it's time for Corinne Brown to go. Glenn, do you have any closing thoughts on this?
Well, Steve, I'll tell you, not directed towards a specific person, but in any organization, the legislature is no exception, there's always something to be said for institutional knowledge, for a person who's got long-standing relationships that can get things done. But at some point, you do need to bring in new blood, and you do need to create a situation where young leadership can arise and take on more obligations and help push agendas down the road even further. I think, Sean, that drives off of what you were saying earlier. there is an exciting opportunity to kind of reconfigure this map that will open up greater opportunities for those young leaders to serve at the lower levels and work their way up through the ranks to get to Congress or Senate. And I think that's what we need.
Well, that opens a question. Is this, the mayor of Jacksonville, who was just defeated, does this open up an opportunity for him to run?
Well, I mean, certainly it does. It opens up for a lot of people, though, right? I mean, you still got Tony Hill over in Jacksonville.
Oh, Tony Hill, one of my favorites.
That would be interested. But I'm sort of biased to Tallahassee people.
Sure.
I mean, there's nobody greater than an Andrew Gillum that you look at a future and hope that after he finishes doing a great job at mayor, that there's somewhere else for him to ascend to, right? I mean, and there's others, Alan Williams to speak of, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you hope that there's an opportunity for him to. So I'm biased towards the West
Openly
on this.
biased, yep.
Towards the west of that on this. But, we talked about Gwen Graham. What does she do? Whether it's a U.S. Senate thing now, who knows? But I think these new maps are going to be exciting, and I think it's going to be an exciting time for the central sort of panhandle piece.
I would close with this one thought. What we still end up having, though, at most, we went from 1 in 6 of our congressional seats were competitive. At best, we'll get 1 in 3 will be competitive. We still have large swaths of voters who have no say in who their congressperson is. This certainly will move the ball in the right directions, but I still think it leaves so many voters off the table. Glenn, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Steve, I do. Fair districts, I think, was a good, and this really comes down to fair districts. It was a good idea. I think, as you note, it will make some incremental improvement. However, the real issue is there are large numbers of voters who are being disenfranchised in the primary process because our primaries are closed, and nearly 30% of voters are locked out of that process.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Appreciate you coming on. Thank you for staying with us. Join us next week on The Usual Suspects.